Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chantal de Jong, MLA for Chestermere Strathmore and Parliamentary Secretary for Affordability and Utilities. I want to thank you all for joining us here today as we announce our government's next steps towards making life more affordable for Albertans. And I'm pleased to be here with Premier Danielle Smith and the Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf. No one should have to choose between power and putting food on the table. And today is the second announcement in less than a week that our government has made on how we're taking action to make electricity more affordable. And with that said, it is now my pleasure to welcome Premier Smith to the podium.
Thanks, MLA de Jong. And thanks to everyone for coming. Not that long ago, most Canadians could afford the basic necessities of life without much difficulty. They could pay their heat and power bills without worrying. They could invest in their family, save for the future, and even afford a few extras. Now, if this sounds far-fetched in 2024, it's only because the cost of living in Canada has skyrocketed in recent years. Most Canadians are feeling the squeeze these days. It's become a fact of life in this country. But just because we've all gotten used to a high cost of living, it doesn't mean we should accept it, and our government won't accept it. We're determined to keep life affordable for Albertans, and that includes the cost of electricity. We don't think the basic needs should feel like luxury expenses for any Albertans, and that's why we're taking action to provide relief for those who need it the most. Last week, we announced changes to Alberta's default power rate and changing its name to the rate of last resort. We announced that the rate of last resort will be set every 2 years for each provider so that customers have far fewer price spikes and far more certainty about the cost that they'll have to pay. And we announced that providers will be required to inform customers exactly what rate they're on and to advise them that they can leave for a competitive rate anytime they choose. Based on numbers from the Market Surveillance Administrator, we estimated that policy would result in about $792 in savings per year for a family. So today we're taking another step forward. This afternoon, Minister Neudorf will introduce legislation to standardize the way municipalities charge local access fees in our province. The total amount Albertans pay for power each month comes from a few different costs. The price of electricity itself, taxes, and fees. One cost that Albertans find on their power bill is called the local access fee, sometimes called the local access and franchise fee. This is a fee municipalities charge to power companies to have their power lines or gas pipelines located within municipal boundaries. Think of it like rent to the city or town or region. That they charge it to the power company for setting up infrastructure there. The power company then passes the local access fee on to its customers as part of their monthly power bill. And the way local access fees are calculated in Alberta is inconsistent. Right now, it's a bit of a Wild West situation. It varies from place to place, and that can make power costs unpredictable, especially for consumers living in Alberta's biggest city. Calgary's local access fees are partially based on what has been historically been called the regulated rate option, which we are now renaming to the rate of last resort. And it can vary wildly depending on the weather, world events, and energy costs, and as we discussed on Thursday. Because the city's local access fee is affected by this variable rate, Calgarians are paying higher power bills these days than other Albertans. Last year, Calgarians paid an average of $240 in local access fees. Meanwhile, Edmontonians paid an average of $75 for the same fees. So if you're doing the math, that means Calgarians were paying greater than 200% more than their neighbors to the north. We think there's a fairer and a better way. We've heard Calgarians' concerns, and this legislation will provide them some much-needed relief on their monthly power bills. If passed, the Utilities Affordability Statutes Amendment Act will end the use of variable rates in calculating local access fees. It will ensure local access fees are calculated in a predictable and standardized way in municipalities right across Alberta. And as we all know, Albertans need predictability in family budgets. Albertans need relief from high electricity costs. This legislation will deliver just that. Now I'd like to invite Minister Nathan Neudorf to share more details.
Thank you very much, Premier. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Listening to Albertans is a top priority of our government and a responsibility I take very seriously in my role as the Minister of Affordability and Utilities. We have heard from many Albertans who have told us a major affordability issue they are facing right now is the rising cost and volatility on utility bills. Today, we are introducing Bill 19, the Utilities Affordability Statutes Amendment Act. This is yet another step our government is taking to ensure electricity is affordable, reliable, and sustainable for generations to come. The Utilities Affordability Statutes Amendment Act will help make utility costs more affordable and predictable across the province by ending the use of variable rates on local access fees for electricity and natural gas service distribution. If passed, these legislative amendments will help deliver relief for many Albertans struggling under the burden of increasing costs they are seeing added to their utility bills. As the Premier mentioned, this legislation addresses local access fees. Local access fees are currently functioning like a regressive tax that municipalities charge to electricity distributors. Local access fees have been significantly higher on power bills in municipalities like Calgary, where these fees have been tied to the variable rates for electricity and natural gas. It is unacceptable for municipalities to be raking in hundreds of millions of dollars of surplus revenue off the backs of Albertans tying their fees to that variable rate. In 2023, Calgarians paid $240 in local access fees on average compared to the average of $75 for Edmontonians, thanks to Calgary's formula relying on the variable default electricity rate. This led to the City of Calgary collecting $303 million in revenue from local access fees, which is a surplus of $186 million more in these fees being collected by the city than they budgeted for. Calgarians should not be on the hook to pad a slush fund for their city hall through unpredictable hidden taxes. We met with the City of Calgary last fall to make that clear, and we warned them that if they didn't take action within a reasonable timeframe, we would be forced to intervene. Instead, we saw the Calgary City Council kick that can down the road, waiting months to pass a motion to make these changes in 2027, long after the next municipal election. Calgarians need relief sooner than 2027, and that is why, if passed, this legislation will be effective by January 1 of 2025. In addition to prohibiting the use of variable rates to calculate local access fees, the Utilities Affordability Statutes Amendment Act would prevent municipalities from attempting to take advantage of Alberta ratepayers in the future. It would grant the Alberta Utilities Commission stronger regulatory oversight on how these municipal fees are calculated and applied, ensuring Alberta ratepayers' best interests are protected by an independent regulator. Addressing high, unpredictable fees on utility bills is an important step in making life more affordable for all Albertans. This legislation will protect Alberta's ratepayers from spikes in electricity prices and ensure fairness in local access fees. Last week, our government committed to changing the name of the default electricity rate from the regulated rate option to the rate of last resort. We are following through on that promise. If passed, the Utilities Affordability Statutes Amendment Act would update all the necessary pieces of legislation to officially change the name of the default electricity rate to the rate of last resort. By changing the name of the default electricity rate, we're ensuring Albertans are better informed about their power bills, and utility bills can make or break a tight budget where every penny counts, which is why we're taking action to protect Albertans from spikes in electricity prices. Today, our government is taking yet another step towards ensuring our electricity system is affordable, reliable, and sustainable for generations to come. As always, we look forward to working with and updating Albertans on the next steps as soon as possible. Thank you, and we will now take your questions.
And as always, we'll go with one question, one follow-up. Starting off here in the room, we'll go to you first, Michelle, and then over to you, Shay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the language that you're using. You know, you're saying stuff like this money is going into a slush fund and that, you know, that municipalities attempting to take advantage of Alberta's ratepayers. I wonder if you can explain why you're using that type of language.
I think probably because the amount that went to the City of Calgary was so high above what was budgeted. It was a significant portion. Not to mention the fact that we passed on, I think, $303 million to Calgarians through our affordability payments last year. Sorry, $329 million in affordability rebates to offset the cost of those power bills. 60% of which, $200 million, went directly to the City of Calgary, part of their massive surplus. So that's obviously not the intention. Making sure that money stays in Albertans and Calgarians' pockets is the purpose of this. And I think that's why we're trying to inform Calgarians and Albertans that this was obviously an unintended consequence, and we want to make sure that we correct it as quickly as possible.
You said unintended consequence though, right? Because you know, the language here that you're using suggests that they're deliberately trying to scam customers.
Sure, I'll let the Premier speak to it.
I believe, and the minister can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Calgary's the only one who calculates their rates this way. And I can tell you, because it was on my radar back in 2006, when I was a lobbyist for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, we tried to get it changed at that time. So it wasn't just an oversight. They knew that they were charging it this way. They knew it was a problem. They persisted in charging it this way. When it resulted in windfall revenues last year because of the spike in the RRO, they took the initiative to say they needed to look at it because it was a problem. They just announced 2 days ago they had a $238 million surplus, of which $200 million came from local access fees, and most of it is going into the reserve fund. So that's not what we intended. When we came through with relief for ratepayers on their power bills, we weren't anticipating 60% of it to be soaked up in higher tax revenues for the city of Calgary. I thought that Minister Neudorf has been very patient. They've known of this for a very long time, and they chose to kick the can down the road to 2027. We don't think that's acceptable. So that's why we're making the change to have uniform policy across the province.
Thank you, and we'll go to Shay.
For the Minister of the Premier, yeah, my understanding of the changes is that because Edmonton already follows this consumption-based calculation, the new rules laid out in this legislation won't really do much in terms of savings for Edmontonians, at least right now. So I guess I'm just re-upping my question from last week in terms of if you're still looking at ways to reduce transmission and distribution fees so that Edmontonians will see savings soon.
Absolutely, we are continuing to work on that. So last week was in broad part targeted for Edmontonians. As more Edmontonians are on the regulated rate option than anywhere else in the province, so they'll see immediate relief in that sense. This one is definitely more targeted to Calgarians. One other point on the previous question that the Premier answered very, very well is that we do have documents from a study of the City of Calgary showing that one of the reasons they have chosen this is because it is the best way for them to gather excess fees. I say unintended because they didn't budget that amount. They couldn't have predicted at the beginning of the year where the prices of electricity would have gone throughout the year. But again, they knew that that was a potential. And we know that if they're allowed to continue in that way, other regions in the province would consider changing their calculations if they can also result in windfall profits for those municipalities, which is not the intended purpose of local access fees. So that's why we're taking this two-step approach with more work to come on transmission distribution.
More still to come. And then just a follow-up for the Premier, and I apologize, it is off topic. There were several questions at today's committee on the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund about your plan to see that fund grow to 250 to 400 billion by 2050. Officials with Treasury Board and Finance only saying that a lot of work is being done and that more information is coming. So can you provide any update as to what work is happening with whom and when we will know more?
Well, there was an RFP that was issued under the previous finance minister to get some advice about the way in which we could manage our heritage fund to be able to optimize the returns. So that report has been complete, and we have our intention is to make that available when the finance minister has finished sort of digesting it and developing a strategy around it. But the work has been ongoing for the last couple of years, and that's part of the reason why we can say with such confidence that we would be able to, with our current strategy of just maintaining the investment income in the fund, be able to achieve a target of 250 to 400 billion. And it all depends on how much additional revenues we put in each year. But I'll maybe defer you back to the finance minister about when that report's going to be released. But there was a lengthy process going through to give that analysis to us.
And we'll go to Jonathan and then Catherine.
Jonathan Bradley, Western Centre. My question's for the Premier and it's off topic. So Prime Minister Trudeau said at a press conference on Friday he's open to going around the provinces to support Canadians if he has to. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that is the spirit of cooperative federalism that we're looking for. There's no need for the Prime Minister to think he has to work around provinces on areas of provincial jurisdiction any more than it would be reasonable for me to say I would do a workaround on the Prime Minister on federal areas of jurisdiction. It just simply doesn't make sense. What he should do is he should come to the table on areas where he has an interest in funding and work collaboratively with us to be able to identify common areas and common ways that we would be able to achieve our joint targets. That's exactly what the Provincial Priorities Act is all about. It's asserting that we have the authority to, as the majority shareholder or the creator of a variety of these entities, to make sure that they're in alignment with our policy direction, and that it's not circumvented by the federal government. So it's disappointing that he said that, because I can tell you I'm not the only one. If you go back and look at the Council of the Federation after our last meeting and the one before, it is a constant refrain from the premiers that the federal government is using its federal spending power to undermine provincial jurisdiction. It's not appropriate.
Well, you have indicated to Trudeau on many occasions to stop interfering with provincial jurisdiction. He continues to do so. Why do you think that is?
Well, he said that his job is boring, and I guess maybe if his job is so boring, he should step aside so somebody else can do the job. Or he should run for premier if he's more interested in the premier's areas of jurisdiction. But I think that there's plenty for the federal government to do. I think that they have an historic opportunity to do genuine reconciliation with First Peoples. I was very glad to see that they announced a $5 billion National Indigenous Opportunities Corp. Very much inspired, I would say, by what we've already done in Alberta. But there's work he needs to do to make sure that he's addressing healthcare concerns on reserve, mental health and addiction concerns on reserve, Indigenous policing on reserves. We've got national defense that requires his attention. We've got international trade agreements that require his attention. We've got immigration that requires his attention. There's all kinds of things that the Prime Minister could be focused on rather than trying to micromanage provincial affairs.
Thank you.
Yeah, Catherine Griffith, Alberta today. So if this is about making things uniform and everything, there's still a whole bunch of different local access fees. Edmonton's is based on $105 per kilowatt hour. Lethbridge charges 15.5% of the distribution. Red Deer's 12.45%. And they're allowed to go to the AUC still and say, oh, I need some of this money for economic development. So why not make changes on that front to those who are already based on consumption?
Good question. So some municipally owned retailers are not under the AUC, so this legislation clarifies that. It also provides a formula to make it consistent across all Alberta. Now they can choose different rates under that formula to what services their needs best. But this again is providing transparency, clarity, and consistency no matter where you live in Alberta, while still allowing municipalities some ability to adjust their fees to recover what they need to for that infrastructure. So this is exactly what we're trying to do with that, is bring that consistency that wasn't there previously.
And I guess off-topic question for the Premier. Minister Guilbeault released his plastics registry. I know Alberta's moving towards more of that circular economy for plastics, but have you had a chance to review it? What do you think about the plastics registry?
Well, let me take a drink from my plastic bottle before I answer the question on whether I think plastics are toxic. The federal court has determined that the approach that the federal government is taking is an overreach. Not only the broad description of how they describe plastics, but also interfering in our area of constitution. So we have already announced that we will be taking the action forward at a higher level. It had been led by various members of the petrochemical industry. And so we'll continue to argue the constitutional cases. Look, I think the solution is that we have to talk about how we do plastic recycling different and better. And we have a lot of appetite on the part of our principal industries here to do that. I know Dow Chemical has talked about how they think that is the next stage that they need to go through in making sure that we do have that extended producer liability or responsibility. So Dow Chemical has announced an historic agreement funded in part by the federal government to have net zero petrochemicals produced within the next couple of years. So the next stage is working with players like that to have, whether it's mechanical recycling or whether it's chemical recycling, so that we can make sure we're taking care of all of our plastic waste here. That's I think, the next stage. And I don't think it does anybody any good to talk about reducing or eliminating this absolutely vital product, whether it's for food safe products, whether it's for medical products, whether it's for any number of industrial uses. when we solve the issue of emissions and we solve the issue of recycling, then we can use them responsibly. But I think that they're going in the wrong direction.
Thank you. We're going to head over to the phones now. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Chris Barco, Calgary Herald. I think this is a question for Minister Newdorf. Minister, you said that you spoke with City Council in Calgary last year and you warned them that they were going to have to change the formula that was tied to the RRO. Can you tell me who specifically were you talking to and what was the response from the City Council?
So, to be perfectly clear, Minister McIver, Minister of Municipal Affairs, and myself sat down with Mayor Jody Gondek at McDougall Centre last fall and talked about affordability issues. She was very aware of this topic and committed to bringing that to City Council, which I believe she did. And I'll give her credit for doing that work. She asked us questions on affordability, but that was where the conversation went to. And this is understanding that the City Council voted as a collective to not address it, at least not until 2027.
Just a separate question, and this is for the Premier. Premier, this morning we got oil prices now over $83 a barrel. That's quite a bit higher than what your budget was predicting at $74 back a month and a half ago. I guess this is a twofold question. One is, how much additional leeway do you expect these higher oil prices are going to give you in your budget surplus, and your spending? And separately, what impact do you think, or do you see it having on corporate spending and investment in the province?
So on the first question, I would say that it's still too early to be counting our pennies and extra dollars here, because as you know, we're only 22 days into the new budget year. And if the oil prices would need to average an extra dollar above what we've forecast for an entire year to generate an additional $600 million. I believe that's the number now. So $600 million times, call it $8 over, divided by the fact that we're only been operating under this assumption for 22 days. I think we're somewhere less than $500 million, and who knows, it could easily go the other way as well. That's why we want to make sure that when we come through with our fuel price relief, that it is based on a certain period of time where the prices have been higher and it's adjusted on a quarterly basis. And so if it stays high, absolutely, we'll be able to give some relief at the pumps when the rate setting happens again on July the 1st. And tell me the second question you had about investment in Alberta.
So are you hearing, or are you expecting it's going to have upon corporate spending and investment within the province?
I would hope so. I mean, the energy companies have been making, finally, after a number of years of terrible times from 2014 to 2022, they are finally able to make some significant profits, and we hope that we'll see that reflected in their capital plans. Right now, of course, they're working on especially the Pathways Group, because oil sands is such a large component now of resource revenues, working on a proposal that would get them to carbon neutral by 2050, which I think they believe makes us the best barrel on the market. So I think that that's the next big investment that we would see on the part of those companies. And I would hope that we would see more production investment as well. I've been told by our officials that with Trans Mountain coming on stream, if we were to optimize all of our existing pipelines, we would be able to produce an additional 1 to 2 million barrels per day without needing additional egress. So I haven't seen the same calculation for gas, but I'm quite interested to see what happens once the LNG Canada starts operating. So I would say, this is why whenever I go to an international conference, I say we're going to be transitioning away from emissions, not the production of oil and natural gas. In fact, I'd like to see us double our oil and natural gas production.
Thanks, Chris. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
Sarah Open, Global News.
Hi there. I've been speaking with some energy analysts who have been looking at sort of what the current fixed rate offers are in Calgary, which is around 10 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And what we're seeing forecast in terms of cheaper power prices for Albertans in sort of the months and years ahead. I'm just wondering, given this rate of last resort, and these critics, I guess I would ask, how do you respond to critics who say this policy is 3 years too late, and would you have any advice for Albertans as they're looking at those fixed rate offers right now?
Well, I think this is actually a great place for Albertans to know that we're providing stability within our market structure for decades ahead. While power prices are trending down right now over the short term, very difficult to predict where they'll be 20 years from now. So these are good policies put in place to protect them. I'd also say that retailers have a number of advantages over the default rate for innovation and ability. And just like mortgages, they can provide fixed rate contracts, but they can also provide variable rates to allow all consumers the best access to a number of different options. That's where we think that this will provide good competition for the business while putting downward pressure for those who are unable to get anything but the default rate for a variety of reasons.
Thank you. Are there going to be any other municipalities that are affected by the changes to local access fees, or is this specifically directed at Calgary?
While this specifically is only impacting Calgary at this point in time, we are aware of other municipalities, in large part due to the windfall profits Calgary saw, that were contemplating making those changes themselves. This is clarifying that this is not the avenue for them to seek those kinds of funds. This is about managing utility infrastructure and should be priced accordingly. So I hope that answers your question.
And we have time for one or two more questions. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
Carrie Tate, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. You indicated that the Calgary was taking too long to implement such affordability measures, even though they were considering it at council. I'm wondering how that differs from your government's decision to not implement your promised tax cuts. Why not give City Council time to work through and come up with its own system?
I think we heard very clearly from City Council that they weren't contemplating a change until 2027, which is a long ways out. It's after the municipal elections and it is in the current year of a provincial election. We think that's inappropriate for in a time frame of an affordability crisis. So we felt that we needed to act much more quickly, where if passed, this legislation would come into effect in 2025. Again, not only to address the situation in Calgary, but the potential other municipalities that would be looking for the possibility to change their rates. And we wanted to close that loophole immediately. Maybe I'll let the Premier speak to the other taxation.
Well, we remain committed to bringing through a personal income tax cut before the next election, and we put out the timeframe for when we would like to do that. If anything changes and we're able to accelerate it, we certainly will. But the first part of the tax cut will be implemented into 2026, and then fully implemented in 2027.
You've mentioned twice now the other municipalities were looking at collecting a similar windfall to what Calgary was doing. Which municipalities were contemplating that, and why are you not leaving this to municipal voters to decide to punt out politicians they may not be pleased with, or politicians who are mulling such ideas?
I don't think it would be appropriate to say which ones were or weren't thinking about that. And again, this in an effort to provide transparency, clarity and consistency all across Alberta, we're bringing in legislation that's under our purview to make sure that all municipalities are treated in the same way, and to make sure that the regulator, Alberta's Utility Commission, has consistent access over all of those price setters, again, to treat them all in the same manner. So we think we're doing our part in providing transparency and protecting ratepayers across Alberta. And that's the work that we have been tasked to do, and we will do that work.
Thank you, Carrie. We have time for one last question. Operator, could you put through the next caller, please?
Alexander Dwal, Rebel News.
Thank you for taking my question. My question is for the Premier, and it is off topic. So last week, Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek said the prospect of never owning a home and becoming a forever renter is a liberating experience. Now, Premier, do you consider these remarks out of touch, given that many young Canadians not only struggle with the affordability crisis, but are abandoning hope of ever owning a home altogether?
Well, I think it's worse than that. I've seen a TikTok trend of young people talking about how they might even leave the country because they can't see a future where they might be homeowners. And that's devastating. We don't want to see that kind of brain drain. I think it's the exact opposite. I think most people look at attainable home ownership as the first peg in their financial plan to be able to start building wealth. And that's part of the reason why my Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Jason Nixon, is focused on both sides, not only an affordable housing strategy, $840 million over the next 3 years to build 25,000 units, but also an attainable housing strategy to work with municipalities to ensure that they can clear away all of the permits and regulatory hurdles that are delaying some of this construction. So I just foundationally disagree with that sentiment.
And as a follow-up, Premier, and my apologies, the question is also off topic. So a 2022 CSIS briefing claimed that Chinese officials were to secretly meet with an elected official and provincial leadership candidate identified only as CA3 in June 2022. Speculation insists that this individual either represents constituents in Alberta or British Columbia. Now, Premier, in an interview with True North recently, you acknowledged to receiving a CSIS briefing on foreign interference. Was this specific issue discussed in this briefing? If not, what? And how will you maintain Alberta's election integrity moving forward?
Well, I asked CSIS if we were a target or if they discovered anything, whether they would let us know. And the answer was no, which I find quite surprising, that we think that to maintain the integrity of our electoral processes, that the CSIS should be able to brief us so that we would be able to make people aware of the level of interference and be able to address it. So I know that there are other premiers who have suggested that the federal government needs to change the legislation so that premiers are also equally entitled to some of this classified information. But it would take a legislative change. And I think the hearings that we saw in the last couple of weeks demonstrate why you need to have more than one entity able to retrieve this information, because there's a bit of a dispute about who knew what about what and whether the information was passed on. So I can assure you I've not got any of that information. It is classified. They're not allowed to tell me. No one's reached out to let me know what it might be about. The CSIS briefing was really more about arming our cabinet and ultimately our caucus with tactics so that if somebody is trying to create kind of an inappropriate contact, that we're aware of it and we know who to call. Because there's a number of different state actors that I think we should be concerned about, and they have said publicly that Alberta would be a target. So we just want to make sure that our ministers and our caucus members and staff are aware of what they should be looking for in the event something feels like it's not on the up and up.
Thank you, Alex. That's all the time we have for questions today. Thanks everyone for joining us.